I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. Today is Wednesday, November 16th, 2022. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. We try to talk about economic development, wealth creation, empowerment on our regular Wednesday series. And today we continue in that vein. I'm pleased to have once again on the show, Tawanna Black. She's founder and chief executive officer of an organization that is making waves in the nation, in the community, certainly. It's the Center for Economic Inclusion. Tawanna is a nationally recognized thought leader known for influencing, inspiring, equipping cross-sector leaders to transform a personal conviction for equality into actions that produce equitable and thriving communities. For more than 20 years, she's led multi-sector collaboratives, triple bottom line diversity and inclusion strategy development, and economic revitalization organizations in places like Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, and here in Minnesota. And in 2017, she launched the Center for Economic Inclusion. That was the nation's first organization dedicated exclusively to creating inclusive regional economies by equipping public and private sector employers to dismantle institutional racism and to build shared accountability for inclusive economic growth. Well, that's a lot, and we're going to unpack that, get into it. What Tawanna and her crew have done recently is introduce and present the 2022 Racial Equity Impact Study. They released a report on racial equity impact. So that's kind of going to be the main topic today. Tawanna, my friend, good to see you. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you once again. I'm excited for this conversation and grateful to be here.
Well, it's always cool and it's always wonderful from my point of view to have the conversation with you. The work is critical. It's necessary, and you're operating at a very high level that has consequences in a generic way up and down the culture, the society on the ground with ordinary people in their lives and livelihoods, but also on the business and economic integration and structures, sort of in a way moving them towards their best accountabilities and their best opportunities to be better, do more, and do it in a way that's inclusive, that strengthens them. So let me start by just having you talk about the proposition of the center. What's the vision, the mission, and bring us to that first of all.
Well, thanks so much for that. I would echo the comments that you just shared about the importance of having us at tables and places and spaces influencing inside organizations and legislatures and public bodies who are responsible for creating changes to our system, creating places that work for everyone, creating economies that work for everyone. And yet at the Center for Economic Inclusion, we recognize that people have to have a good why in order to do that work. They have to believe in the work. They have to believe that something better is possible, an anti-racist, equitable, and inclusive economy is possible. But they also have to have the how. They have to have the tools and resources to be able to do that, and a framework for accountability. So at the Center for Economic Inclusion, that's exactly what we do every day. We leverage our research, our analytics, our consultants who are strategists, and I call them kind of architects of building inclusive workplaces. And we partner alongside employers, both mid-size and large corporations and local and regional governments, to help them understand the way that racism is creating a barrier to their ultimate mission, and then the way that they can take that racism on, whether it's in their talent lines and supply chains, the way that they go about their philanthropy in communities, or their core products and services, and the way that they use their leverage and their influence to ensure that the public atmosphere, the public policy arenas in state legislatures and local city council chambers and county commissions, that those policies are working for all of us, and that corporations and businesses have an opportunity to use their leverage to do that. So we help them do just that.
So let's approach this in sort of three movements, if you will. One, it's always good to do review, to do context. And so what is the environment? What is the narrative out of which both the interest and the work emerge? What is the framing of the problem? And it has been around, but has been framed all kinds of ways for all kinds of reasons. But you've been able to assemble a vision, a version, collect and create a narrative that allows different new and appropriate approaches given the time and space that we're in and the histories. So do the background. It's movement number one is
Sure.
the background, the context. Number two is talk about this phenomenal team you've assembled. I've watched you put together a crew, and the crew that you've got is simply amazing. And it's wonderful to see our people, talented, accomplished, credentialed, experienced, capable, confident, and enabled. And the enabling is the part that you play. You create the structure, the process, the environment that frees our people, our professionals to be their very best selves in bringing and making solutions. So talk about that team and the strategy in building the team. And then the third movement is talk about the future. What is the outcome that all this is being done for? And in that regard, I want you to talk about the report on racial equity impact. So that puts the whole thing in kind of a flow, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
An excellent flow. I love that.
My job is going to be the punctuation. I want you to flow, and I'll raise questions with the intent to illuminate, clarify, emphasize, or to mostly support what you're doing, so that as I hear it, I think others will hear it and understand it as well. So let's talk. Let's go.
Excellent. Well, I'll start with where you led me, right? So the background, kind of what's the impetus for this? What's the context in which the center exists, why we exist, and more. So the center, I'm proud to say, we're celebrating our 5th anniversary this month. It's been quite a long and amazing journey all at the same time, and a hard journey. As an entrepreneur, as I know, being in those shoes as well. And as we come into this 5th anniversary, we're reflecting on what the impetus was for creating the center. And for myself personally, 6 years ago or so, I was working for Northside Funders Group, working to drive racial equity in North Minneapolis, working to help foundations specifically to take on racism inside their own institutions in order to create new ways of operating, new ways of relating to community and investing in communities. And while that work was wonderful in a lot of ways, we made a lot of impacts and strides in that space. I recognize the importance of all sectors in closing racial wealth gaps and the need for leaders who often work at a regional level to have a little more fine print about what happens inside cities, what happens inside neighborhoods and communities, and what levers they can be pulling to drive change. And so the center was birthed out of a belief that the private sector and policymakers not only have an accountability to the public square, and to the consumers that they serve, right, the workers that they're working to employ, but also that it's possible. So I've seen this work happen in other places where we didn't have a race lens on it, but had an economics lens on it. So I know the ROI that comes back to a business when it is both acting in the best interest of its employees, of its consumers, of its supply chain, and that we don't have to go about these things as parallel opposites. And often in the economic space for race, we have historically, as economic developers, as planners, even community, we've assumed that when the market is good, we can work on things like racism. And when it's bad, we can't. We back off of those things. But the data suggests a different story and suggests that really no region, no community will get to that place where it's prospering and thriving over the next 25 and 50 years if we don't figure out how to maximize all talent. If we don't figure out how to grow businesses that are owned by Black and Brown people, because we're the growing majority in all states. And if we don't also get to this place where belonging doesn't mean that you help me belong to a culture that was created to exclude me, but that belonging can be redesigned and recreated to mean that we're all co-creating a new space, a new way of operating where everyone truly can bring their full selves. So that's the kind of context and the why behind the center. The timing of it, launching in 2017, was a period when many of us were looking at the constant disparity reports, whether the reports on how our local government and state government were doing coming out of a disparity study, that showed troubling results, right, in terms of the amount of investment that was going into Black and brown businesses, the talent that was not
If I
only
remember correctly, back in the day, the state put
Yeah.
out a report saying that out of its, I'm not sure how big the state's spend was with businesses, but when they first made a report, it said less than $1 million, maybe $100,000, $200,000 was spent with Black businesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Painful.
Less than 1% of the
Yeah.
dollars were going
Yeah.
directly into Black businesses. And we could be shocked by that, but really when we look around, we're not shocked. We don't see, when we see businesses being created, we don't see businesses growing and scaling to be job creators and having the capital to create and sustain jobs that pay family sustaining wages. And so that mantra that we say in the economic development space that Black and brown businesses will hire their own wasn't always the case here, because if you can't grow, you can't grow. And it doesn't matter, how you're able to hire if you don't have the resources to grow. So we recognize that. The other piece of the story was as a mother, as a wife, raising 2 Black children in a state that I don't believe values their brilliance. I don't believe has created enough systems that are able to value the brilliance of all Black kids. It was too much for me to stomach, to sit on the sidelines or to sit in a job. But I needed to put my hands to as much work as possible to help ensure that policymakers, that employers have a new way of thinking about why we are where we are, why the stats are the way they are, and recognize that in particular, when it comes to wealth building, we have to start with equitable employment and equitable wages. And this region and our state have had persistent wage gaps for more than 15 years. And in fact, in some of those years, that gap grew. And that means people are going to work doing the same job, but getting paid differently based on race. That's unacceptable. And too often, to that why point I started with earlier, we're solving for symptomatic issues instead of solving for the core disease. And that data shows us the core disease is racism. It's structural, it's systemic, and it can be turned around, but not if we don't confront it. So that is the work that we do every day at the center. You got to name it.
You got to name it. You have to name it, right?
Absolutely. You have to name it and get comfortable. A great economic developer we like a lot said several years ago that the only cities that would thrive in the future are those who could talk about race and talk about it well. I agree with that. I think, though, it's important that we make sure when we're talking, we make sure race is not the problem. Racism is the problem. And so sometimes the way our solutions have been designed would suggest that the problem are Black people, like we're the problem. And so we're the problem to be fixed. We don't believe that at all. We believe the problem itself is racism. And there are some byproducts that have come as a result of generations of systemic racism that haven't been undone, despite many investments and strategies and programs. But if we get to that core and can be uncomfortable enough to stay focused on that core long enough, we think we can get a different set of results.
My friend Ann Pritchard put a note in the chat saying if our Black-owned businesses might grow if our own Black communities will step up and support our Black-owned businesses. I want you to, over the course of the conversation, talk about that as well, what role we all have to play. And Ann, thank you for that comment. In fact, Bosch, if you would, put the link in the chat. And Ann, if you're available, I'll have you join the conversation. We've got time, and love to hear your voice. Ann's an entrepreneur. Do you know Ann? Do you know her?
I don't believe so.
Entrepreneur, just a wonderful human being, a business person. And I'm glad that she's listening, glad that she's commenting. So if you're available, Ann can jump on the call, please jump in. And thank you for watching. And tell everybody you know to check the program out. We're live right now. And we want all of us to keep expanding our network and letting people know that we're having an important conversation. My guest is Tawanna Black. Tawanna Black is talking about, among other things, the important work of the report on racial equity impact, the report put out by the Center for Economic Inclusion, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So go ahead, Tawanna, keep going.
Absolutely. Well, you referenced our team at the Center for Economic Inclusion. I appreciate it. I'm grateful for the love and affirmation shared about this team. I think in this time, it's important that we not only talk about the values that we're espousing, but that we live those values out. And so we have been blessed to identify and recruit and retain and grow a team of people who are all not only passionate about racial equity, not only passionate about economic inclusion and growth, but equipped and skilled to be able to help employers and policymakers learn how they can take different steps, help them build strategies to do so, give them deep and meaningful learning experiences as well, and then measure that change over time. And so we are a team of not only consultants and researchers, but also a team of strategists and folks who are sophisticated in being able to run the analytics that help businesses and policymakers know where are we today, where do we want to get to in the future, and what can we do about that. And so I'm really grateful for our entire team at the center. I would also say, though, our team, because we're small but mighty, our team also includes some amazing Black-owned businesses and entrepreneurs who are extensions of us. And we've been blessed since our first year of operating to be able to build some really strategic partnerships that have allowed us to produce great results for our clients like Ramsey County and St. Louis County when we look at the public policy side or public sector side of things, and Gillette Children's and US Bank and others when we look at our private sector side of things. And so we lift up those businesses as well, who together we're much more powerful than we are when we're apart, and are just really grateful for having that full team.
So I really would like, Tawanna, if you're available or willing to do it, say the names of that powerful team and kind of brag about them.
Absolutely.
They are worthy of being mentioned. And why, for me, is it important? I think we have to have protocols that always present the best of who we are and what we stand for to each other. That when you and I meet, I'm not just meeting my friend, but I'm meeting an energy force that is accomplished, and that has meaning and that is making meaning in the world. And my hope and expectation is that that is the plane on which our contact amplifies and grows and nurtures both of us and everybody around us. And if we can create the protocols and practices acknowledging that special nature and capability, we grow and we learn, we multiply the impact that we have in community. So talk about your team.
I absolutely love that. Thank you for that approach and for the opportunity to share some more about the team. So we are a team. We're growing constantly every day. I'm like, what number are we at? I think we're just under 25 right now on our staff side. And then we have a board of directors as well, who are all working hand in hand in solidarity in this work. A team, some of whom have been here since day one with me, and some who've come over that time and continue to thrive in the organization. Our chief of staff, many folks who follow education might know Suzanne Kelly, who has been a longtime leader in chiefs of staff roles at Minneapolis Public Schools and St. Paul Public Schools, the St. Paul Foundation, Memphis Public Schools, and has been just a tremendous asset to me as a right hand in this work and to our whole organization and team as well. Andrea Furstan is our Vice President of Innovation and Policy and Research, and Tony Tolliver is our Vice President, of Engagement. And Eve Aronu is our newest member of our leadership team, who is our Vice President of Marketing and Engagement. And they work alongside one another and myself, with also our Senior Director of HR, who's Tamara Pinkney. Folks who might have been with Travelers or might have been in the private sector may know Tamara, and our other members as well, who are often frequently in community. And Michelle, who is our Vice President of Business Operations. That makes up our leadership team. Beyond that team, we've got, as I mentioned earlier, a really diverse set of people who are working in public policy, where we have Isaac, who is our leader, our director of public policy, and came to us from the legislature. Again, places and spaces, to your point, where we don't often think there are Black faces that we can tap, but we've been blessed to have Isaac come in and not only lead that area, but teach all the rest of us. My team's actually at a lunch and learn with him right now, learning about our policy agenda and how all of us drive that agenda in other places. We have Tim Boudreau, who came to us and is leading our racial equity consulting arm. Tim came from Cargill. We've stolen a few people from Cargill here very recently and are grateful for that. And Tim breathes in a long career in talent recruitment and helping leaders really come to value all talent and figuring out how to drive that through their pipelines. Nathan Arnasti is our director of analytics, who really works on things like not only this report, but our racial equity dividends index, our indicators for an inclusive regional economy, Our analytics team, as someone from US Bank introduced us once and said they might be as better than that team. And I say hands down, they are just phenomenal. But what's really amazing is it's not just that team. Everything we do is interdependent. And so that team weaves in the talent and knowledge from our entire team and from the voices of community. So they're spending time, whether it's in focus groups or interviews, helping to build research projects together with community or our community partners like NAO companies, who is one of our most longstanding partners that we subcontract a lot of work with and partner with in our spaces. I'm going down the list now to keep going. Tiffany Wilson Rosley is our Director of Employer Education and leads a phenomenal body of work. We have employer cohorts at the center where employers come in groups of, say, 15 to 20, and they're hungry for what are the skills I need, what are the tools I need, what's the knowledge I need, so I can attract the right talent, I can build that talent in my organization, I can have the right supply chain that's going to help me diversify the businesses in this ecosystem. And what do I need to unlearn about race, about racism, about people? What do I need to unlearn so I can learn new things? And so Tiffany leads that. She also, though, coaches then our entire team to help ensure that we're applying principles that get at the root causes, historic and more present root causes, and that our strategies are grounded in that. Saroon Aram is our Director of Project Vanguard, which is our initiative to invest in Black and Native and Latino businesses, and is Saroon was in our consulting division, just moved over and up into that role, and just brings a wealth of information about how to grow the economy by those investments and to leverage the full strength of the center. And Sheree Ingram is our managing director for consulting services. And I say Sheree's space is really the engine behind the engine. I tell the team Sheree's job is to be all up in all of our business, all up in all of our clients' business, and be sure that we bring the very best solutions, the very best talent to any challenge that a client brings to us, and that we're learning from that and then applying those learnings into other places.
And that makes you the engine behind the engine behind the engine, right? I see how this goes right now. This is awesome.
It does. It absolutely does. Jonathan Johnson is leading in our business development arena, has been one of our longest standing employees. And Jonathan is also that voice in the ear to go hear the needs of communities, to hear the needs of employers and policymakers, and connect those back to what we have to offer and how we can deliver. Has been one of the greatest partners in helping us expand an experience we have, along with Tiffany here recently. We have taken now about 75 executives in the C-suite of businesses to Selma, Montgomery, and Atlanta to learn about America's history with slavery, with lynching, and how that history is still very much present in our economy, and then what they can do once they come back here. So it is a powerful trip, but then the more important piece is what do we do because of that knowledge? And so Jonathan really helps leaders understand the value of those learning experiences and the value of applying then the tools and knowledge we give afterwards. We have Kosar Muhammad, who is our director, is just moving into a new role, has been leading our inclusive growth arena, and just recently, very recently, moved into being our director of strategic partnerships, and just brings a wealth of knowledge and commitment to communities, a wealth of experience from her time with the city of St. Paul, and had been a part of partnerships that we had in community before we managed to pluck her away from Mayor Carter's hands and bring her into our organization a few, just not very long ago. We have consultants in our organization, Sarah Milner. We have Maggie, who's a consultant as well, a whole team of folks who all apply their knowledge and skills to what our clients and our partners need. And then we have a leader of research who we were able to recruit from Minneapolis Public Schools, Betsy Orrin, who partners with us to be able to study these issues, to be sure that we're studying not just the quantitative, but the qualitative experience that workers are having, that consumers are having, that Black businesses are having, and that we bring that into the solutions and strategies that we deploy with employers. We have a whole team of folks who are working together solidly, and I cannot leave out our admin team because they are that backbone. I talked about the engine and the fuel in the engine. The backbone of that is a team of people who are experts at managing time and talent and resources, keeping us in line and on time and on budget, along with our finance and biz ops team, where Michelle is leading with Alvina and Shanisa. And they're just awesome. And I have to call out, of course, my own right hand, Kimberly, who has just been a wonderful addition to us, another person we recruited away from Cargill, as well as Linda, Heidi, and Karen, who have just been a phenomenal team for us and are our backbone. I would say, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, our board of directors are great partners for us. They are the ambassadors of this mission in the places and spaces where they operate. And Ro Attaby, who many people may know at Thrivent, has been a very active community champion, as well as the chair of our board. We have a number of people beyond that who serve on the board, many of whom, again, have been here. Commissioner Tony Carter and Rapamaka have been with me since the very beginning on that board of directors, and then work with a complement of leaders from across the region and actually the nation now. We've recruited a couple members who are not Minnesota based, given our expansion, and are recruiting more, and they work arm in arm with us every day.
You're replicating what you do on a regional and national level. Is that correct? I think I've read that recently. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's another conversation. We'll come back to that one. This is phenomenal. I'm so glad that you took the time to give a shout out to all of the members of your team. I think they deserve it. And I'm hopeful that the protocol of doing this establishes how we always must value the resource that each of us brings to problem solving. So the third suite in this conversation was to talk about the work and the vision, and to do that in the light of the report on racial equity impact. As you do that, think about this, Tawanna. I am so impressed by structure of your work around research and data. And what does the notion of data-driven decision making mean to you personally, but also to our people, also to the problem? That's a big general question to respond to. Then how has data research disserved us in the past? Been a way to keep us out, but how have you discovered that it's a way to get in as well? That the street is a two-way street. The data and research are agnostic at the end of the day. It's a question of the intent of the organizer, the assembler, the worker in the field. So talk about how you see our people gaining both the ability, the skill, and the experience of documentation, data documentation. And it's a question of creating a system of documentation of both experience, and in the process of experiencing, we discover, we innovate. I think what you're doing is moving into the realm of innovation. And the key is to document everything as you do it. So talk about that. Am I on track? Am I going on the right road?
I absolutely love this question, in part because I just came back from one of our trips to Alabama on Friday. We were at a group there last week. And when we look at how much of our history has been documented, because people have been very intentional, right, about going back and recapturing not only the statistics, but the stories that help inform what we do in the future. I'm struck by our need to your point, we have to be documenting right now exactly what we're doing, how we're doing it, what we're experiencing while we're doing it, because that will serve generations later who hopefully will look up and call us great ancestors if we do our jobs well. And so at the center, when I think about data-driven and data-informed practice, we hold those as two unique words and words that we define. And we've chosen to make our work data-informed because of your second question. Data-driven work suggests that, okay, what's the data set that I've been given or that I've done the research on, and how does that drive my solutions, my strategies, my investments, my research and development, all those things. Unfortunately, when creating the center, one of the things that I was reacting to was too often data-driven policies either marginalize us in many ways or separate us and set us up for a failure. And what I mean by that is, if I take a report, whatever the latest report is on not just disparities, but say I go to the state of Minnesota, to DEED's website, and I pull their report card on performance of workforce development programs. And this is one, we've run a program for Black men in North Minneapolis for 7 years. So this is what I'm really familiar with. If I just am being data driven, then I'm going to pull that report and I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, one, hardly anybody's doing amazing with Black people who are seeking employment, but some are doing pretty good. But when I think about the adage of, should I be investing my dollars in Black-led solutions, in innovative solutions, If I'm solely data driven, then I've got kind of a tunnel and I will miss out on opportunities that are unique to that. If I'm data informed and I start to ask the question, what part do I have in that data? So if I'm a policymaker, if I'm an employer, if I'm a foundation, if I'm a local regional government, if I'm a workforce board, I'm a small business owner, I'm an auntie of somebody who's seeking employment, whatever role I am, what's my role in that data? And how does that inform my practice? But it can't be the only driver, because unfortunately, too often our data has either not been properly collected and analyzed and reported, or it's been done so to the peril of us, right? So it shows one side, but not the whole. Another example, if you look at this data has moved some, but Harvard's initial work on economic mobility and studying, could you move families from one neighborhood to another neighborhood in order to get a different set of results economically and prepare the next generation to move up economic mobility and mobility-wise. In the first version, I happened to be at Harvard when the study was coming out, and I asked the question, did you include any qualitative data about what those families needed, how they were supported in the neighborhood before they were moved and after? Because I'm not a researcher, but my life experience says that when you have a neighborhood, I'm from a small town in Kansas, and my mom, my dad died when I was 10. My mom kept working, but she could do that because the woman at the end of the block watched my every move. So sometimes the phone would ring and she'd be able to say, yeah, what are you doing? And I knew immediately, like, oh, shoot, right? I know that from lived experience. I don't need a report to tell me that, but I do need to be able to say to researchers, hey, did you ask those questions about what it takes to surround a family? And our own Promise neighborhoods have seen this as well, where families move up the economic ladder and say, okay, that means it's time for me to move out. But if I move out so soon that I don't have that network of support, whether it's a support for my children, for their tutoring, for transportation, whatever those things are, I may actually come back down that economic ladder faster because I'm missing that. And researchers don't always know to go to the nth degree, right? To keep asking the question behind the question behind the question. So our practice is data informed. We think quantitative data is important. We know qualitative data is important. But we also know when we're doing this work inside employers with policymakers, often our results are going to go backwards in year 2 or year 3, not because the employer isn't making good strides or doing good work, but because once you stay on the job, people start to believe you. And they will say, okay, I gave you those answers last year about what was good and what was not good. Now I think you're serious. So I'm going to really sit back and tell you everything. Now I'm going to give you the real deal about what's happening inside this organization because I trust you more. I believe that you really want to know. And a data-driven approach might say, oh, Lord, it's not working. Let's stop everything. A data-informed approach would suggest, actually, no, we need to lean in even the more. We need to get to hear these stories more. We need to not only survey annually, but we need to talk monthly and bring in more and measure, are we applying the knowledge we're gaining from this data? Or is it data for data's sake?
This is amazing. Listen, let's finish up this interview pivoting to the report on racial equity impact. And I'm going to just summarize what I'm reading from your website and then let you go into it. Your notes say that public policy is a powerful tool for justice. It drives regional, state, and federal investments that impact communities and the economy. When racial equity and economic inclusion are not prioritized and considered with intention in policymaking, the result is often inequitable policies, a loss of economic growth, and harmful impacts to Black, Indigenous, Latino, and Asian communities. Since the 2021 legislative session, the Center has advocated for racial equity impact notes. It's a policy tool used to ensure consistent analysis, leverage experts from all Minnesota communities, and facilitate informed decision-making through established questions that help inform the extent to which existing and proposed legislative policies and investments will increase or decrease racial disparities and advance economic inclusion, growth, and competitiveness. So let me stop reading there and have you go in and sort of break that out. What does it mean? And what the findings are so far, and what's the end game here?
Absolutely.
You summarize it, but you can break it out. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll start with the end game. Ultimately, we recognize states all over the country, and certainly ours, are considering policies daily that have the label of racial equity, maybe the label of racial inclusion, might say Black, might say Latino, on down the line. But there are rarely mechanisms in place for us to know what's the end result that we're seeking from that policy, that bill, that ordinance, and how will you know if you got there? What should the public hold you accountable for achieving as a result of passing this bill? And so several states over the last several years, since 2008, have adopted racial equity impact notes, not unlike an environmental impact note, which is more popular in states like Minnesota, where we're saying every policy that comes forward through the legislature, in this case, we're focused on the state, should be measured so that some work has been done in advance to tell us, how is this either going to widen disparities, exacerbate them, or narrow them? And we should be very specific in doing so. So the Center Voices for Racial Justice, Blue Cross Blue Shield's Center for Disparities, worked together with several other community-based organizations a couple of years ago in the session to advocate for, with the support of both Senator Champion and Representative Samantha Yang, in order to push for racial equity impact notes. One key ingredient we wanted to see, though, was a work group that would include, yes, policymakers and employers, but also everyday folks coming from Black and Brown communities who could speak to what needed to be in that racial equity impact note. And we made a lot of good traction that year, but found that ultimately the legislature was not supportive, not simply of the idea. We had support for the idea, but there was tension around, should the community really be involved? How many people from the community should be involved in creating what those notes look like? So we took it upon ourselves to say, before we go back and fight that fight again, let's just fund the research, because that was what we were asking for in the first year, was let's fund the research that will tell Minnesota what type of impact note we should have, how we should approach creating that and then managing the impact note, and what lessons have been learned from these 8 other states who have passed racial equity impact notes. And the simple headline is it came back with strong favor for creating a racial equity impact note. And that's not I think, surprise for anyone. There's a lot of drive for accountability within the legislature, but that has to be a two-way level of accountability. And the more specificity we can have, the better. It also noted kind of what the process might be for doing this work, because we recognize that bills come, the legislative process moves very quickly. And if we were to create a process that was so labor intensive that it slowed down any bills to get from getting through, that wouldn't only be a penalty for the legislature, it'd be a penalty for our communities. And so this process really helped us over the last year get very clear about what a process is that we can recommend, how we at the center and our partners across the state can also support legislators and legislators, while we advocate for them adopting these impact notes, and while we advocate for transparency in the reporting of how these bills are actually creating change in our communities or they're not. And to that question we had earlier about being data informed and data driven, we've got to get to a place where when we see something's not working, it doesn't mean we throw it out, but it does mean that we pivot. We come in and we learn from that. We talk directly to the people who stand to lose or gain the most from those bills.
Awesome. And so what findings so far? This report, what are the base findings in this report that you're
Great question. So this report gave us both a sense about how we could approach racial equity impact notes and suggested that we should move forward with them. However, that we should start in one place. So in our original proposal 2 years ago, we were pursuing racial equity impact notes for the entire state, which would mean a health bill, an education bill, environmental, farm bill, economics, you name it, would be included. The report came back to suggest to us that starting in one place, in our case specifically with economics, would be important and would be meaningful to the state. So other states have started, for instance, with criminal justice policy. Our report came back and suggested that for Minnesota, to start with economic policies and bills, and then as time goes, be able to add additional areas would be very important. It also gave us some sense of how to propose the components of this racial equity impact note. And for those who might be saying, okay, what does that mean? You're using the phrase, what does it mean? Essentially, this means that the legislature would be creating a working group with legislative officials as well as the community and employers, a rubric that helps us assess. So anytime a bill comes forward, the research could be done in a speedy way and an assessment completed to say this bill is likely to exacerbate or narrow disparities, and here's how. Or these words might need to be changed in this bill, for instance, in order to ensure that the intended goal is really going to be the impact of this bill later.
So is the goal to put all the proposed bills through that process, or particular bills? I mean, that's a lot of bills are on the table each session. It seems like it's too much, but maybe I'm wrong.
Absolutely. It does seem like a very labor intensive process for us. And so that's part of the goal in focusing exclusively on those bills that are about economics. So a deep partnership with the Department of Labor and the Department.
I mean, even that's a lot.
It is a lot. And it gives us a chance to say, if we were to go down this pathway, would policymakers begin to partner and collaborate even the more with community, such that that number of bills does not have to be as many? If we look at what outcomes we're achieving today with the number of bills that we have, I'd suggest that it might beg a question about our approach. And I think many of our policymakers have worked great with us. Our United Black Legislative Caucus has been a wonderful champion and partner. Our Posse Caucus has been great at partnering with us, as have several others. And yet there is greater and greater opportunity for the legislature to be partnering in the same way that we ask nonprofits and community-based organizations and workforce groups to partner in those ways and to take the lessons learned.
You opened a door that I can't not go into, and that's the change in the recent elections. The fact that we now have a trifecta, they're calling it, in state government with the executive and the both houses in the legislature, all controlled by the DFL. What does it mean? And why is it important for us to talk about it, particularly when our state's looking at a $10 billion surplus that's going to be dealt with in some way or another? How do we ensure that the concerns of equity show up in that process? And so I'm also thinking about asking, as you focused on economic, does that mean certain departments or certain branches of the government, or does it mean just bills across any sector that have a particular specific economic impact? And all of them do at one level or another, but some lead with financial or economic impact. So what do you think?
Absolutely. Two great questions. I think I may answer the second question first.
And I know you've got to leave in about 5 minutes, so
all good. All good. I think that first opportunity to be thinking about economic bills where they're leading with an economic indicator. So perhaps we're leading with investments that are going to go to small businesses. We know that the vast majority of businesses in America and Minnesota are small by definition. So the more specific we can be in articulating who we're investing in, who this policy is going to serve, whether it is a granting a policy, we're creating a new grant stream, right, that's going to benefit businesses, or it is a stream of investments or policies that are about land and acquisition of land, or it's a policy about how and when state dollars are used to attract large corporations into our market, and what standard we hold those corporations to after receiving those incentives. Those types of policies that are exclusively about business and economic growth and job creation are the policies we would really look at here. To your point, everything impacts economics at some point. We want to be really laser-like focused on those economic focused policies. The first question you ask gives us an opportunity to step back and again, focus on the how. And as we link that to the why, we have an opportunity here with racial equity impact notes, but also our broader policy agenda to think about how we ensure that while we're celebrating having a trifecta, we're also celebrating accountability. The things that happened over this last session, as we look at the significant surplus we had even in the last year, and how much time it took for dollars to get deployed to frontline workers, we should not expect to see the same thing if we're celebrating a trifecta in this case. We should have our agendas already ready because we know what communities not only are hurting simply because of the pandemic, but what communities have been cut off from economic prosperity in our state for generations, and therefore never were at the same starting line when the pandemic hit. So as we think about those resources that are flowing into our marketplace now because of the federal government, which is significant and astounding, in addition to our standard surplus, we have an opportunity now to work with this trifecta, both here in our own state, but even our legislators at a federal level, to ensure that there's accountability for results dollars have to be allocated. They have to be allocated with a lens that is not race neutral, but is specifically looking at particular populations. And given the Black disparities in our state, but also the Black opportunity, you started today's program talking about the excellence and expertise and brilliance that is in our community. We celebrate that here inside our organization. We have to invest in it as well. Those career pathways that people are not normally going to because we haven't seen Black people in them, those careers are either going to grow our state's economy or hinder it. If we take an approach that is specifically focused on different racial populations, it'll help to grow the economy. And that's how we hope that both having the changes in who is seating in those halls of justice, but also the accountability that exists within communities, because stakeholders are serious and want change in our state.
Well, Tawanna Black, I think that's the mic drop. I think this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for the energy, the clarity, the story, the narrative, and the promise and hope that all of them emerge from or foster in community. Thank you for the work for the Center for Economic Inclusion. And what I didn't do that I wanted to do, we've done it before, but I'll do it again next time we talk. Let's go more into the Tawanna Black story. I always love asking my guests, who is your mom? Who's your dad? Who's your granddad? Your great granddad? I wondered, you took the trip to Alabama, you said, I think.
Yes.
Will you be taking the trip to Jamaica or the trip to Accra? Yes. How about the next or additional steps in creating linkages for commerce and movement of capital and opportunity between African people throughout the diaspora, and Absolutely. Not in conflict with, but as a part of the development of our economy and our mission to be involved in that and to see it in a global context, to not limit ourselves, right? And in that regard, be able to move in a sense of innovation and balance and cooperation. Listen, I'll go on and on. I want to thank you. Thank you for being here, Tawanna Black.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, our newest member of our leadership team just last week mentioned that to me, like, okay, we've got to have a tour that is to Accra. So it may be a partnership between you and us because we believe that that's critically important, both for our communities as Black folks, but also for those who are investing in our communities to really understand that history and understand how it shows up in our presence today.
Well, check out what we're doing. To get an insight, we've got a section that we have started called Afrodescendientes, and it owes to my own Cuban roots, Afro-Cuban roots, but also we took that and went to adding, creating a story that's running in Spanish, Portuguese. We've got a correspondent in Bahia, a correspondent in Venezuela and Colombia, and then we translate the article into Yoruba, into Swahili, into, of course, Somali, and French. And the idea is to present that we are present in a number of idioms and that our concerns are similar. Absolutely. And it makes sense that we figure out ways to tell the same story across a variety of experiences and languages and create opportunity for us to be together, to build, to co-author a future that is beneficial to all of us and to humanity itself. Tawanna, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Let's talk about that. Okay.
Look forward to it.
Take care. We'll see you later. I'm going to close out, but I know you got to go, so I'm going to say goodbye to you.
Thank you.
And then to our viewers, go to the Center for Economic Inclusion, to their website. We'll put that up again so that you can see it. Check out this work. This is important. It's impressive. And what Tawanna has done, what she and her team have done, is absolutely nothing less than phenomenal and amazing. And it's setting a standard for the space that we ought to be operating in and the ways we ought to be operating. Professional, clear, and accountable. Documenting everything. That's the key. Well, listen, I want to thank you for being a part of this show, this conversation. I want to invite you to support this work by being a part of it all the time. We're always looking for people to join us in the conversation. We want to be a platform. We are a platform that allows you to express your point of view, to tell your story. Your story is our story. Our mission is to be the platform that elevates your voice and gives us a chance to bring our ideas forward to each other in ways that we challenge each other and that we support each other as well. I was mentioning to Tawanna the project called Afrodescendientes, and I'll show that really quickly to you. This is one of the articles written by Professor Dr. Jesus Chucho Garcia, who is writing from Venezuela and sometimes Colombia. This particular piece was a piece about the challenge, the problem in Haiti, article in English, Haiti, Dignity at Stake. And it talked about how the dysfunction in the Haitian country right now is a product of historical deception and devaluation of African life, of Haitian life. And it asks us to look at what we can do by being aware. The point here, though, is that we are presenting stories like this in, as you can see, Spanish, English. The third one is in Portuguese, then in Yoruba, and at the bottom of the page, you can't see it here, it's also in Somali and Swahili and French. Why? Some will say, Al, why are you presenting all of these languages in your newspaper? And my answer is, I can't read all the languages personally, but I'm curious. And I can read the ones in English, I can read the Spanish, but as I begin to get in the habit of reading it, my curiosity invites me to see what words are similar, what words I might recognize, and over a period of time, because it's available and because the expectation is that the possibility is that I can pick up a word here or there, or if I choose to, because I have Somali neighbors, or if I choose to, because I'm studying my genealogy and I discover that I am a Yoruba descendant, that maybe I'll start learning bits and pieces of the Yoruba language, or if I choose to, because my friends are from East Africa and speak Swahili, and I see them in community and in cultural, and a word or two, or if I'm an Afrocentrist and I'm studying or exploring our historical culture, just feeling an ownership of these languages is important. Most important, I talked to the Black Ink workshop this past weekend over at McAllister College. I was honored to be the keynote speaker of the Sankofa series for this year. And one of the things I talked about was how becoming a writer was a product of my dad asking me to read the daily newspaper to him at the dinner table every day. And he took me down newspaper, and I'd read a story and read another and another, and every day. And generally, he would always compliment me on my diction or pronunciation or enunciation. And that encouragement made me feel so good. It was wonderful that my father valued, appreciated, and praised my use of the language. I say that's the beginning and the basis for what I have always described as a love affair with words, a love affair with language, an appreciation of the power of language, the power of speaking. And as a consequence of that, I have begun to study of late ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. That's another story. But what's the point right now about learning languages and about Afrodescendientes? The point I tell myself is that if a 5-year-old child can learn a language, you raise a child in a Chinese home, he's going to learn Chinese, or a Brazilian home will learn Portuguese, or a Russian home will learn Russian, German, same thing. Point is, children learn the languages And so I tell myself, the adult, or as a student even, if a child can learn it, so can I. If a child can speak it, so can I. And the importance of saying that to you right now is that we have to develop that kind of confident attitude about our approach to language, to learning, and to everything. If a child can do it, so can I. So I also say that I encourage in times to speak like this, that our families, moms and dads, get your sons and daughters at the dinner table and ask them to read to you. They will appreciate your interest and the praise that you will give them when they demonstrate their increasing mastery and the ability to speak to you, and to have you evaluate, criticize, and praise them will motivate them in ways that you can never imagine. So that's something you should do. And the real point here, I'm speaking now as a newspaper owner, as a newspaper man, as a publisher, writer, we should read Black newspapers to Black children, read our newspapers to our children for two reasons. One, it's our work, it's our version, our view of the world, but it's a body of work that exists to celebrate our humanity, our success, our future, our glory, and our potential. And if we don't tell the story, create narratives in which we emerge victorious, I tell you, it's not going to happen. Well, this is a great opportunity here to I reflect on, kind of marvel at the work we've done. These covers all tell stories that are powerful and passionate, beautiful stories. And if we scroll down a little bit, you can see what we've done over the years in presenting our idea of who we are to each other. So I hope that you'll check out Insight News and other Black newspapers, Black magazines. Build an appreciation relationship with Black books written by Black people, being sold by Black businesses. The economy of being Black is an economy that should be a growth economy for us. Only we can decide how to do that, and that it's worth doing. And I tell you, I told people Saturday, we are acculturated into thinking of Africa as 60 or 70 or 57, 55 different countries. But that configuration of Africa really came from the colonizers, not from within the African people. And that's why it's important that we sort of use the Sankofa model. That means look back at the history of our culture, of our people, examine where we have been, but really examine it as we fly into the future, guided by a knowledge of where we have been, what we have done, that informs what we can do. So use Black newspapers, use Insight News, connect with us digitally as well, use social media, let's create community. I want to make one last recommendation before we close out today's program. I'm wearing this merch from an organization called Narrative. And within Narrative, you will see, and you've seen me wear another sweatshirt with the title Nubia, Knubia. First, people ask, narrative, what is narrative, and why do you spell narrative with a K? My answer is, well, why do you spell knowledge with a K? Because it makes sense, and because you decided that's the way it's done. And someone's made this decision to spell narrative with a K, to give it a distinction. Well, so this is an online community that is like nothing I've ever seen before. I'm a part of it. I subscribe to it. And one of the features, the many, is a Saturday session that attracts almost 2,000 people. It's called In Class with Carr. And it's a discussion by Professor Dr. Greg Carr, who's the head of the Department of Africana Studies at Howard University, and his co-host partner in the development of this initiative, Dr. Karen Hunter, who is a Sirius XM superstar, first of all, but also a professor in journalism at Hunter College in New York, also a multi-award winning and multi-book publisher, doing the work, both of them. And they've assembled just a cast of great people, just like Tawanna Black has, to create to innovate and to create a pathway for exploring this idea of an Africana way of knowing. And the core question behind the work is, in examining everything, ask the question, how does it free us? How does it free us? And be intentional in choosing actions that reflect a movement that will give us freedom, success, and accomplishment. I could go on. I'm stopping here. Thank you for listening. I want you to share this, like it, subscribe, support this work, and we will see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.